Ludwig the Accursed and Holy Blade is a foul centaur monster trapped in the hunter's nightmare. From his boss arena, a river of blood flows past countless dead bodies and bloody, half-alive bodies like this pitiful thing right here. And it all culminates in a cave where beasts and a particularly nasty blood-starved beast awaits. For what reason, Ludwig seems obsessed over his Moonlight sword, believing it to be talking to him and guiding him.
You were at my side all along. My guiding moonlight.
Upon his defeat, the hunter receives the guidance rune, and Ludwig says the mysterious line,
"Have you seen the thread of light? Just a hair, a fleeting thing. Yet I clung to it, steeped as I was in the stench of blood and beasts."
That thread of light appears to be what's guiding him in his slaughter of monsters. So what exactly is the thread of light, and how exactly is it guiding Ludwig in his journey? The milkweed rune states, those who take this oath become a Lumenwood that peers towards the sky, feeding phantasms in its luscious bed. Phantasms guide us and lead us to further discoveries. So this line is probably the most important, keep this in mind. The milkweed rune, it tells us that the player then becomes a Lumenwood. Suddenly there's like a weird bush on his head for whatever reason. And it's pointed towards the sky. So it's basically absorbing the moon's energy. And then that attracts little phantasm slug creatures to the Lumenwood, and then the slug creatures eat the Lumenwood, okay? The empty phantasm shell states, empty invertebrate shell that is said to be a familiar of a great one. The Healing Church has discovered a great variety of invertebrates, or phantasms as they're called. So phantasms are the slug-like invertebrate creatures that seem to be blessed with godlike powers, as can be seen with the Ogre of Ebrietas, a slug that can partially summon Ebrietas, and a Coal Beyond, a slug that can summon an arsenal of exploding stars. So it appears that the slug-like phantasms feed off of plants that can absorb the power of celestial bodies. If we think about photosynthesis, where a flower absorbs the sun's light, a lumen flower is similar, but instead of absorbing the sun's light, it actually absorbs the moon's light. Phantasms are attracted to the moon's energy, and that's what they really feed off of. Herbert Wells discovered that the black sky eye is actually teeming with slug-like parasites. So as with a lumen flower that can absorb the moon's energy, the black void pupil of an eyeball is actually quite similar and absorbs the moon's energy. The parasites in the black sky eye feed off of that energy, and that's why they exist there. All the runes associated with beastliness, so the beast rune, beast's embrace, and guidance, all feature a slithery, worm-like creature with a flayed end. A Coal Beyond appears to be a suspiciously feminine-shaped slug with a worm-like tail and a flayed end. The guidance rune in particular appears to be a worm-like creature about to feed off of a particle of light. When Ludwig, as a human, stares at his Moonlight sword for hours and hours, just meditating on it and watching it, his eyes are actually absorbing the energy that radiates from the blade. That energy goes into his eyes, and then the worm-like parasites living in his eyes actually feed off of that glowing energy. When Ludwig closes his eyes, the phantasms light up like the moon, and he can see a thread of light dancing on the surface of his eyeball. If we also consider the crow at the top of the research hall, it too drops a weaker guidance rune, and people are like, okay, why is that? Well, it's because crows pluck out the eyes of dead corpses and eat them. Hemwick is filled with crow symbology, and also eye symbology, and images of women plucking out the eyes of their victims, just as a crow does with a corpse. The reason the crow has the guidance rune is because it's eating people's eyes who are infected with parasites. So when Ludwig closes his eyes quite peacefully, and he meditates and he's talking about the wonderful things he can see, what he's actually looking at is...
Doctors struggled to diagnose what was wrong with John's left eye. Then Dr. James Folk found the problem.
And it was just by luck, the first picture we looked at, we saw the worm right kind of in the middle of the retina.
That's right, a microscopic worm was swimming around inside John's eye.
It actually lives usually underneath the retina of the eye and crawls around and actually eats the retina. When you hit it with the laser, of course, it was very upset. As upset as a worm can get, I suppose.
I saw something wiggling. And I asked if the worm was wiggling like this, and the doctor said yes, and I said, well, I can see it.
This thing was just thrashing around violently. I mean, it would be like one of those Titan movies of Iron Man or something like this.
The worm is dead, but John must do computer exercises to strengthen his eye. His vision has improved, but may never return to normal.
Have you seen the thread of light? Just a hair, a fleeting thing. Yet I clung to it, steeped as I was in the stench of blood and beasts.
And it might be a combination of like, well, the crow is eating eyeballs, and then because he is perched at the top of the research hall and looking out the window, you know, and he's looking out to where the living failures are, I think the combination of that is sort of what gives him the guidance rune. It's like everyone is infected with these small little worm-like parasites, but when those parasites are also combined with like a certain like celestial power, so like what the living failures have and what the Moonlight sword has, when that combination comes into effect, that's when the parasites glow with that power. That's when they start eating those little particles of light, and that's when they start to glow whenever it gets dark. Ludwig claims that he's guided by the tiny beings of light, so it appears that the parasites have a special control over their host. It's the parasite in Ludwig's eye that's guiding him to kill more and more beasts. So for what reason, it appears that the parasites benefit from the bloody slaughter of beasts and men. Richard from Jerkson's Frontiers has previously speculated on the idea that the vermin in people's bodies seem to form a habitat in the throat, and he's also drawn parallels to certain parasites that live in the mouths of fish. And when the fish eats, the parasites then get to share in the feast. This has led him to conclude that the parasites may have something to do with the blood drunkenness, and the parasites are compelling their host to seek more and more blood. As with Ludwig in his guidance rune, it's the parasite in his eye that's compelling him to kill beasts, and all the hunters in the nightmare are drunk with blood and seek more and more of it. If she survives the night long enough, Eileen too mocks about how much she desires the hunter's blood.
Few hunters can resist the intoxication of the hunt. Look at you, just the same as all the rest. The hunters must die. The nightmare must end. Only I can stop this madness.
Your blood is mine! A hunter's blood for me! Your punishment is death! Death to hunters! Enough of this terrible dream!
One of the only hunters in the nightmare who appears to be without such blood drunkenness is Simon, and his bowblade states, Simon despised firearms, and so the church workshop had this specially fashioned to his liking. The large curved blade served as a bow when transformed. But aside from a few close friends, Simon was scoffed at for his choice of arms, for who could dare face the beasts with a measly bow? So Simon attacks his targets from a distance, and his fellow hunters seem to dislike him for it. But it's probably the exact reason why he isn't blood drunk. When hunters get very up close and personal with beasts, and so violently slaughter them with weapons designed to smash them, saw them, gore them, and get their blood everywhere, they then become slathered in the blood of their prey. And the parasites that are living in the blood then find a new host in the hunters. Those hunters then become subject to their parasites and are compelled to seek more and more blood. Because Simon attacks his targets from a distance, he doesn't get nearly as bloody as his comrades, and so he retains his sanity and his cleanliness. The eye of the blood-drunk hunter states, its pupil is collapsed and turned to mush, indicating the onset of the scourge of beasts. So one of the symptoms of the beast plague is actually blindness. The reason that so many of Yharnam's inhabitants appear to be blind is because they have parasites living in their eyes and eating away at their eyes. Since a character like Father Gascon is blindfolded, he too is presumably losing or has already lost his eyesight due to the parasites, and the only way he can detect where the hunter is by smelling him. For what reason, the player can actually obtain each piece of Valtr's clothing in the nightmare, excluding his bucket. Valtr's bucket is also called the One-Eyed Iron Helmet. The helmet states, a single hole allows one to peek out with a single eye, which is probably all that its original owner had. So all of Valtr's attire is attainable throughout seemingly random parts of the hunter's nightmare. We know he only has one eye, and the eye of a blood-drunk hunter must be used to arrive at the hunter's nightmare. Valtr's Constable Garb states, "Once upon a time, a troop of foreign constables chased a beast all the way to Yharnam, and this is what they wore. The constables became victims of the beast, except for one survivor, who in turn devoured the creature whole, all by himself. Since Valtr wears this attire, and since he's still alive, it seems apparent that he's the one survivor of the troop. If we also assume that the eye of a blood-drunk hunter is Valtr's lost eye, that also explains that he was infected with vermin who were eating away at his eye and caused him to go blind, and it was vermin in his body that compelled him to feast on the blood of the beast like a madman." Valtr's Impurity rune states, "This rune, discovered inside the forbidden beast eater, came to symbolize impurity and the oath of the League." It's quite an odd sentence because it says that this image of impurity was found inside the beast eater, but Valtr is still alive. And one summonable variant of Valtr is known as Beast Eater Valtr, so he's quite apparently the subject of the rune and the one who ate the beast. The two summonable variants of Valtr are Valtr Beast Eater and Valtr Master of the League. Valtr Master of the League is the version of Valtr that wears the bucket with one eye. The other still has both eyes. So it seems like Valtr chased a beast to Yharnam. The beast killed his friends. He compulsively ate the beast. The Yharnamites saw it and thought, "That's a little strange." The church took him and somehow cracked some part of his body open without also killing him. Given that he only has one eye, it seems like that was probably the avenue by which his body was explored, and the image of impurity was discovered inside him. And if you'll notice about the eye of the blood-drunk hunter, it isn't just the eye, it's the flesh around the eye that's still also attached. So if Valtr was cracked open and explored, he's probably missing a pretty considerable section of his face. And that's why he wears the bucket. I don't blame him. And when the church took out his eye, that's when they found the parasite, and they were able to conclude, okay, this is what was causing him to go mad and eat a beast. The impurity rune states that the image of impurity was found inside the beast eater, but I'm not entirely convinced it literally means that the image was what was found. I think it means that they found the parasite and realized that there are parasites in everybody's body, so they start to perform bloodletting as a means of curing their own impurity and washing out the parasites. Because we find Carol runes in the Chalice dungeons, so the Healing Church were already aware of the shapes of the Carol runes, but they weren't aware of what each shape was supposed to mean. It seems to me that they found a parasite in Valtr's eye. They realized that the symbol of a man or woman dripping blood from his arms is how one expels vermin from the body and washes it away, hence purity or impurity. As Jake Sans Frontiers has noted several times, in Japanese culture, still bodies of water are dangerous because that's where mosquitoes and parasites lay their eggs. Rivers and streams that are in constant motion are not good habitats for those creatures to lay eggs because the eggs get washed away. So bloodletting is how the Healing Church assumed one could wash away the vermin and expel any kind of addiction to the old blood. This also explains Valtr's unending hatred for vermin, because it was vermin that compelled him to eat an entire beast creature.
I am Valtr, Master of the League. Members of the League cleanse the streets of all the filth that spread about during the hunt. Like any half-decent hunter ought to, you know? The night brims with defiled scum and is permeated by their rotten stench. Just think, now you're all set to hunt and kill to your heart's content. Vermin writhe deep within all filth and are the root of man's impurity. All vermin are to be crushed. The League exists to expunge all vermin, ridding us of any trace of human corruption. And so, until we are rid of all vermin, you must continue to hunt and kill. This bloody fate is ours alone.
And if we think about the Constable Garb, then it also says, the fable is a favorite among Yharnamites, who are partial to any stories of pompous, intolerant foreigners who suffer for their ignorance. It makes the blood taste that much sweeter. So the Yharnamites are already taking blood, they're already consuming blood. The Constable is not. So if the Yharnamites are already infected with parasites, that the reason that they don't eat the beasts is because they're already consuming old blood and they're already satiating the parasites that are compelling them to pursue the blood and eat the blood. The constable, though, he doesn't have that. Valtr doesn't have that. So that's why he eats the beast, because he is so desperate for that blood that the parasite inside him is telling him to eat. That's the idea. As the Beast rune states, Beast is one of the early Carol runes, as well as one of the first to be deemed forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. So the church is aware of this image, and they forbid its inscription. It seems to me that the church knows that there are parasites living in people's bodies and blood, and when Ludwig says,
I never wanted to know what it really was. Really, I didn't.
It seems like the church may have been suspicious of him, and they forbid him from learning too much about what exactly it was he was looking at whenever he closed his eyes. So if the church doesn't want people to know that there are parasites living in their bodies and feasting on their blood and is compelling them to do certain things, they're actually using Valtr and the League to basically exterminate all traces of the vermin so that way people can never know about it. If we look at his dialogue,
the League exists to expunge all vermin, ridding us of any trace of human corruption.
now that seems like that is his purpose, is to expunge all evidence that there is vermin in the world and they're writhing around in people's bodies. At Byrgenwerth, Master Willem is seemingly brain-dead and helpless, and he appears to be hosting a plant-like specimen out of his neck or back. As with the milkweed rune which states, those who take this oath become a Lumenwood that peers towards the sky, feeding phantasms in its luscious bed. Phantasms guide us and lead us to further discoveries. So Master Willem is trying to host phantasms in a similar way. We also know that Master Willem is obsessed with eyeballs. They appear all over his academy. Mechanically, insight is the process by which the hunter witnesses something godly and inhuman, and if we consider that eyes absorb the moon's energy, it's as if the hunter is absorbing more and more godlike power, and it's all accumulating in the hunter's eyes, and then passes into his brain. If parasites are attracted and feed off of that energy, it seems likely that they find home in people's eyes as well as the brain. Insight is often referred to as eyes on— No, you have to be kidding me, now is not the time for this. There's a vacuum. I guess I will just have to wait. I'm only almost halfway done is all. It's fine. It's fine. Oh, why? Insight is often referred to as eyes on the inside, and so far, we've all presumed that it was a literal occurrence, that there are literal eyes growing on the inside of people's brains. However, I'm not so certain. As we can see with the Briotas, her brain, or what's presumably her brain, is exposed, and people have all called these little red bumps eyes. However, a Briotas already has two normal eyes to either side of her face, or normal for like a slug creature thing. So all of these little red bumps, they're actually shaped like beetles or leeches, and they aren't really shaped like eyes. They're actually parasites feeding off of that godly power that's been accumulating in a Briotas's brain. They burrow under the flesh and their bodies cause an unbroken protrusion or bulge where the parasite can be visible without a microscope and without actually having to break the skin. So it's my conclusion that when people talk about eyes on the inside, they're actually slightly mistaken. There aren't literal eyeballs inside people's brains. It's that the eyes absorb godlike powers, pass that power into the brain, parasites into the body, arrive at the brain, feed on all that power, and they cause round bumps that then appear something like eyes.
It came through the artery to vein, circulation, and it grew in here. See it right there? There's nothing that looks like this that's not this. And sooner or later, it'll run out of food.
If the parasite dies, the inflammation could blind Cordero. If it lays some of its 50,000 eggs, they could travel to his brain and begin eating it, turning it basically into Swiss cheese. Thankfully, that didn't happen.
Very lucky, very lucky. If it's in the brain, he would present with seizures.
Given that the only people who have seen incredible and godlike entities will be able to host these parasites, insight becomes a kind of complementary title. If a person has eyes on the inside, or a brain teeming with brain-sucking parasites, it's a sign of incredible enlightenment. But then again, the accursed brew specifically says, skull of a local from the violated fishing village. The inside of the skull was forcibly searched for eyes, as evidenced by innumerable scratches and indentations. So it literally says that the skulls are being searched for eyes. And as it says with the Black Sky Eye, Soft eye, blessed by a phantasm, they were discovered through Byrgenwerth's contact with the arcane, but in the end revealed nothing. So we do know that Byrgenwerth, they are searching specifically for eyes, and we also know that the accursed brew was sort of forcibly searched and you know, cracked open and was looked for eyes. So the evidence does kind of point to, like, no, there are actual literal eyes inside people's brains. And as we can clearly see with the Black Sky Eye, there are parasites all over the eye. So it sort of goes hand in hand that if there are eyes inside the brain, then there will also be parasites. Or it could be that as part of his experimentation, Master Willem and his students literally were putting eyes on the inside of their brain, and if those eyes absorb the mune's power and then they put it inside the brain, yeah, it kind of then makes sense that their brain suddenly has more power and then also becomes a host of parasites. So Master Willem is presumably very, very enlightened. He resides atop his balcony and stares at the moon or looks at the moon reflected into the water, and there are literally so many parasites in his brain that he barely even has a brain left. He's being eaten alive by slugs to the point that he himself is more slug than human. He's almost completely overtaken. The scholars who become brain suckers are a similar way, where their bodies have become hosts to brain-eating parasites to the point that that's all there's left. As Richard from Jerk-San's Frontiers or something has pointed out, in Japanese culture, still bodies of water are considered dangerous, because that's where mosquitoes and other parasites lay their eggs, and running streams or rivers where the water is constantly in motion, the eggs and parasites get washed away. So when the moon is over the lake, it radiates a special power that's then reflected in the water. Parasites thrive in that environment. As well, the local flora absorbs the moon's energy and is also fed by the lake water. When insects eat those flowers, they become especially big and nasty centipede-like creatures, which in the guidebook are named fluorescent flowers. As Sinclair discovered in one of her videos, the insect people around the college are known as Gardens of Eyes, and when they grapple with the hunter, they appear to bite at the hunter's throat. She also formed a parallel between the Garden of Eyes and the facehuggers from Alien that attach themselves to a host, inject the host with a parasite, and then the parasite later bursts from the host. So it seems like Byrgenwerth fell victim to the various insects and parasites that exist around the campus. The fluorescent flower grappled with a scholar who then became infected with a parasite which ate away at the insight in his brain. He then became a Garden of Eyes which would later infect other students, or perhaps he became a brain sucker, who knows. This also explains the importance of Gehrman the gardener. Prior to the doom of Byrgenwerth, Master Willem would need to employ gardeners to keep the local flora clear of parasites, and Willem would also need beast hunters to keep the larger insectoid creatures from overrunning the college. However, once Lawrence leaves Byrgenwerth and Gehrman goes with him, he no longer has the protection of the hunters, and the campus becomes overrun with parasitic insects and slugs. It also makes me wonder about Rom the vacuous spider, and how she seems to sort of have like this brain-dead nature. Perhaps she too was a human with Tumerian at one point. She planted foliage upon her body and became host to little parasites. The bugs ate away at her brain until there was nothing left, except the parasite itself as a collective organism. But I don't know, that might be another video for another day. But there's yet another curiosity. Beasthood is a trait that works inversely to insight. The more insight a hunter has, the more slowly a hunter's beasthood bar rises upon consuming a beast blood pellet and attacking opponents. So why is it that these two traits work inversely to each other? I'm not really sure. I think if we can determine the critical difference between the vermin that Valtr seems so keen on exterminating and the phantasms that the choir revere, we might be able to figure it out. I think it's that the centipede-like vermin live and feed off of the old blood. So when a Yharnamite consumes the blood, he also becomes host to countless little parasites. As Richard from Jerk-San's Frontiers has pointed out, vermin seem to reside in a host's throat, and then the host consumes something, so the vermin then gets to share in that feast. The phantasms, on the other hand, seem to reside in the brain and eyes, and they seem to feast off of insight. The best explanation I can contrive is that the vermin and phantasms are actually natural enemies, and they kill each other, so when a person has too much insight, like Master Willem, he becomes victim to dozens of slugs who eat his brain without any kind of obstacle to stop them. When a person has too much of the old blood, he seems to become addicted to the blood and blood-crazed and seeks more and more blood quite relentlessly as he's at the mercy of the vermin in his body who are controlling him. More blood, that sort of thing. When a person has both insight and old blood, the vermin and the slugs consume each other, so there's like a natural balance. In nature, it's critical that each ecosystem remains balanced. If one particular species becomes too dominant, it throws the entire environment into havoc. If wolves in a forest are purposefully hunted by farmers who are trying to protect their flocks of sheep, that means that the deer are left to reproduce unchecked, and they start to overpopulate without any kind of natural predator to kill them off. Then they eat all the plants and grass available to them, and then the whole forest starts to starve. Vermin and phantasms might exist in a similar way, where they have to balance each other in a host body in order to keep the ecosystem alive. Willem pursues eyes on the inside without the use of old blood, and so he becomes overrun by phantasms. Lawrence deviates from Willem and pursues old blood without insight, and so he becomes drunk with blood and it overwhelms him. It might also explain Ludwig's split persona, where he's quite beastly upon first encountering him, but then his eyes absorb the moon's energy, he gains insight, and some of the balance is restored in his body, and he becomes somewhat human again. And then if we also think about the way Ludwig's body is structured, like he literally has his face, which is sort of horse-like, and he has a body that's kind of human and kind of horse-like, almost like two organisms that have been smashed together. And most importantly, he has this sort of second head that's sort of protruding out of his neck, and it appears almost like an earthworm. And it has the teeth and it's sort of chomping around, and inside the mouth, that's where all the eyes are. So I think that's kind of further evidence that, yeah, he's definitely infected with a parasite. And that's sort of like the amalgamation of all the parasites in his body forming into like one kind of form with him. But I can't really know for certain. These are really like my best conclusions that I've been able to come up with so far. And really, originally, like I was working on a video about Briotos and Queen Annalise, I guess, and Rom, and it's like, well, why do you have to bring the flesh to Rom's dead corpse and all that? I was really working on that, and then I sort of like speculated and sort of like had the idea like, oh, I think I understand that there's a parasite literally in Ludwig's eye, and it's telling him what to do and all that. So that was quite interesting. But feel free to tell me what you think in the comments down below. And I will be working on my next video about a Briotos, I'm pretty sure. It might be Mikolash, I don't know, I haven't decided yet. Subscribe if you want to hear more, I don't know. To this day, I still don't know how to end these things. This is always the awkward part. It's like, what am I supposed to say? I just sort of start rambling like this. So I think that maybe I should, like, come up with, like a catchphrase. Like, goodbye.